Hello everyone, Amer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time I am reviewing Season 7, Episode 16, which is called The Question. This one starts with a guy named Nicholas Varsi opening an empty airport locker, where he's met by another fellow, who gives him new identity papers in exchange for his passport. They're surrounded by federal agents, and Varsi tells them that he wants to defect. He has a lot of important information to give them. Jim uses spy speak on a building rooftop to get instructions. The mission: Varsi is a skilled assassin for the KGN, and it's unknown whether he really intends to defect or whether he's just providing false information to the United States. The IMF must discover the truth without the help of federal intelligence, which may be compromised in the matter because they might have a deep cover mole. In the apartment scene, we learn that the FIS has been holding Varsi for about a week in a condemned building under heavy guard. We see a bunch of gadgets and guest agent Andrea, played by the returning Elizabeth Ashley, who we saw in last season's episode Encounter. Varsi and federal agent Nelson have a long discussion about his arrangements for safe asylum before he gives up any information. Neither one seems ready to blink and make the first move. Barney comes by and throws an explosive into one of the building's windows, and police patrol come by. Turns out it's Jim and Willie. The agents investigate around the building to see what's going on, while Willie sets up a crude bomb in the elevator, and then the two head upstairs to Varsi's room, where Nelson tells him to keep a close guard. They pick the lock and use a knockout ring to subdue Varsi and put a Willie mask on him. Willie hops out a window, while Jim sets up another bomb and gunshot as a distraction. And despite Nelson seeing that Varsi has vanished, he has allowed Jim to take the injured Varsi as Willie out to an ambulance which Andrea and Barney have brought. Willie hides in the police car and the IMF speed away from the building. The feds find nothing in the building, and Nelson cleverly realizes that the only explanation is that Varsi's in that ambulance. So he orders one of his men to give chase. A smartly placed roadblock allows the IMF to evade the feds. Varsi awakes to find himself in a cellar with Barney and Willie in his face, taking him into a room to talk to Jim, who says he's Mr. Smith, head of KGN operations in the U.S. They give each other some code and countercode, and Jim demands to know why Varsi is defecting. Varsi claims it's just a story he gave the FIS because he had no choice, and doing so is necessary for his current mission. Jim asks questions about his assignment, but Varsi says he takes orders only from a Colonel Kemmer, who works in extreme secrecy, and he also follows that philosophy, so refuses to give Jim details so as not to compromise his assignment. Jim demands proof, but Varsi says that anything could be a trick. Even Jim himself could be trying to trap him. On his way back to the holding cellar, Varsi catches a glimpse of a crying and distressed Andrea in another room with apparent tormentor Willie, and soon after they're put together in the cellar. She recognizes him and claims that she is an IFS agent who was caught by Smith's men. They seem to share a mutual mistrust, but also an attraction, and the IMF's lie detector machine is uncertain about whether or not Varsi is telling the truth about anything. He has amazing control of his emotions and no detectable tells. The IMF come into the cellar, and Jim, as Mr. Smith, says that he believes Varsi's story, but needs proof the only way he can get it, and tells him to shoot FIS agent Andrea, which will mean he won't be able to run to them. Varsi apologizes but pulls the trigger, which doesn't contain a bullet. Jim says he's proved his loyalty and says he will provide him with whatever he needs for his assignment. Jim gives Varsi a nice blue convertible and some equipment, and he also asks to take Andrea along as a driver. Varsi, that is, asks to take Andrea along as a driver and potential hostage should he need it. Meanwhile, Nelson and the cops continue to search for Varsi and the IMF, who leave their hiding spot and track the car. Varsi and Andrea stop at an electronics store where he gets Andrea to hide in the trunk while he goes in and gets an electronic bug detector to scan the car as well as Andrea, but finds nothing. He does, however, find a bug hidden in the collar of his shirt, which he disposes of. Next stop is a gas station where Andrea adjusts her hair barrette, re-establishing a signal for the IMF. The curious gas station attendant activates the detector, which registers a signal to Varsi's surprise, and the second bug is discovered. Varsity comments at the fact that now suddenly there's more questions as to which side who Andrea, not to mention Mr. Smith, is really working for. And he stomps the bug out, meaning Andrea's on her own. They go to an apartment building where Varsity sets up for his assignment and a meeting with Kemmer, tying and gagging Andrea because if Kemmer sees or hears her, he'll likely kill her right away. While Varsity continues to prepare, Andrea is able to get to a phone in the room where she dials Jim and taps a message in Morse code, barely able to get back to the bed to avoid giving herself away when Varsity comes in to check on her. There's a knock on the door, and Varsity comes face to face with Colonel Kemmer, who is actually Agent Nelson. He congratulates Varsity on having come this far and cleverly demanding Kemmer to come and meet him, but then gives him the glum news that he realized that Varsity's plan was to kill him, so he made sure that the firing pin of his rifle is defective. Kemmer shoots Varsity, but not fatally, and finds Andrea in the bedroom, telling her to tie Varsity up to keep him on the ground and, not a threat. Kemmer then says that he'll carry out Varsity's assignment, following up by using his position as Nelson to kill Nicholas, the real mastermind behind whatever the assignment is, and unfortunately poor Andrea will be collateral damage, and he will come out a hero. Jim and Willie arrive at the building, and Jim sees a rifle in a window, climbs up the wall as a limo pulls up across the street with a throng of people surrounding it, and Kemmer identifies his target. Varsity and Andrea, despite being tied up, work together to knock over a lamp and distract Kemmer, with Jim jumping at him through the window, and a fight ensues. Willie's presence ends that quickly in the IMF's favor. Varsity is loaded into an ambulance, and Andrea says she's glad that he actually turned out to be truthful about defecting. He asks who she really is, and she says that will have to remain a question. Mission accomplished. I am going to give this episode a grade of an unqualified A+. Very, very, very surprising and refreshing for Season 7. Much like Kidnap a few episodes ago, this is a really, really, really great one at this stage of the series. Let's start with what is good. Jason Evers, I've commented many times. He's been in several episodes. And I have said from the very beginning, the first one he appeared in was The Mind of Stefan Miklos, one of the best episodes that they ever produced. And I commented then, and I've repeated every time he's been on, that anytime this guy is on your show, you are going to have a good episode. He is the perfect kind of guest star for this show. Also excellent. Gary Lockwood as Varsity is tremendous. I've seen him in some other shows. Notably, he was on the first, what I guess you would call the first normal episode of Star Trek after the pilot, where, he played a similar type of character, a guy who would gain some supernatural powers. I don't remember the entire story. But again, always had the kind of look on his face and the attitude that he portrays and gives off in this episode about how, really, really self-assured and, has a chip on his shoulder. That comes across really, really clearly. And in this case, it works tremendously well. Fantastic casting choices in both cases for those two roles. And of course, the best thing about this episode, no question, is Elizabeth Ashley. What a wonderful return for her after Season 6's encounter, in which I totally gushed over her. And she deserved that. She was worth every moment of screen time in that episode, and she's worth every moment of it in this episode. Hands down. She is great. And I really, really wish, not that Linda Day George isn't doing a great job, but boy, would it not have been great to have Elizabeth Ashley in more episodes. Would have been tremendous in my opinion. Also, really good here. This is a real quality mission. I have commented in several of the episodes over the last little while, especially in season 7, that the IMF is going out and trying to take down people who are really lame schmucks. If not both, definitely at least one or the other. Easily manipulable, and the plots don't really seem to have a whole lot of difficulty or risk. This one turns all of that upside down. This is really an elite agent level mission, not just a run-of-the-mill outwitting an opponent and fooling them into doing what the IMF wants them to do. That's how most episodes are in season 7, and even a lot of season 6. Even in past episodes, many of them are past seasons, I should say. Many of them are like that. In most cases, the IMF is really able to tilt the scales to favor them. Happens so often. And that is really not possible here because of the nature of the mission and also the competence and intelligence of the antagonists. You are dealing with people who are the IMF's equals in terms of, understanding the game that is being played, in terms of intelligence, in terms of competence. This is totally an earned win. And this is the type of episode that mission should be. Gosh, if it was like this every time, you can't hit a home run every time, but boy, when this show is good, it's really, really good. And this episode is a prime example of it. I'll also say something that I really liked about it is that this is obviously a minimalist production. There's not a lot of, sets in terms of, fancy sets. A lot of it probably takes place on, Paramount property in the Paramount Studios. But that's fine. The story really is the key. And I would say that the minimalist production actually adds to the episode. It certainly doesn't take away from it. The opening sequence where the IMF abducts Varsi from FIS custody, that is cerebrally very, very neat. It's not flashy at all. They use a little bit of gadgetry or whatever, but it's not fancy, it's not flashy. And that's actually, I think, really, really good. It reminds me very much of episodes early on, like in season 1, such as Operation Rogosh, where I commented that the minimalism is a plus. In future episodes, like Invasion and 2000, which were basically remakes of Rogosh, we've discussed those, I commented that the IMF brings to bear kind of a small army, and they seem to have unlimited resources. I've mentioned that in many, many episodes. Here they don't. And they're able to pull it off despite that. I love that, and I think that that is a really, really big plus for this episode. The IMF makes the most out of having no help. They don't have a repertory like they used to have often in seasons 2 and 3. And there are people surrounding them on all sides working against them. They've got the cops and they've got, federal agents who are basically trying to, work against their mission and still able to pull it off with not a lot of resources. Mostly just with intelligence and know-how. And that's how it should be. I have commented in the past that I don't like stories where we have these kind of subplots about which side is this person on and that sort of thing. This episode is all about that, right? That's the whole focus of the story. However, I will say that when I've made that sort of comment, it's because that happens where the writers are trying to establish a personal, usually a romantic story between a man and a woman. And then often it becomes a which side are they on, and that, confuses things. Nicole from season 3 is a good example. Decoy from season 5, which was a personal plot, and it became a lot about, are you guys playing me or are you guys not playing me? And, a whole bunch of that sort of stuff comes into play. And the reason I feel that in those episodes it takes away from the story is because the writers seem to try to have it both ways. Is this a personal story with a romance attached to it, or is it a Mission Impossible story? And it doesn't seem to be fulfilling on either side of it. We just had that in the previous episode, Boomerang, where, there's ostensibly these romantic things going on between Jim and Eve Vale, but again, it all comes down to who's playing who, and which side's plotting is going to win out. Here we have a brief interlude of some kissing and things like that between Varsi and Andrea. So it almost seems at first like that's the direction that the writers are going to go. But I'm really glad that they didn't. They talk. There's obviously some attraction there, whatever. But it isn't really played up. And it certainly doesn't take away from the focus of the story. So it works. Clearly, the writers, went in the right direction here and focused on the story and didn't go down that road of getting distracted. And I really, really like that. Also really, really good to go back to some other comments that I've made about some other episodes in the past. Whenever we have a mysterious character, I have commented that tends to be problematic. The episode that I usually refer to here, and I think it is the best example, is the episode from season 4 called Orpheus, where the IMF is trying to identify an assassin who nobody knows. There's one person who is actually able to contact this assassin when necessary, but that's actually never been done because it hasn't been necessary up to that point. And I commented in that episode, and there have been a couple of others, where we know from the opening scene who the assassin is. And then it just becomes just the IMF discovering that person's identity, but we, the audience, already know who that person is. So even if you get a good story out of that, where the IMF go through a neat process, an interesting hour of discovering who that person is, I've commented that there's something a little bit lacking with that, because we already know who it is as the audience. And then there are other episodes. A good example would be Bagwoman from last season, where we don't have a character reveal in the beginning. In that episode, Bagwoman, you'll recall that the IMF's mission is to uncover an underworld figure named C6. And then we find out in the end who C6 is, and it's just some random guy, right? Why does this matter? Why do we care about this person? If it ends up being someone that we don't really know, and we have no connection to, and we don't really care about, then that is also problematic. And I've commented in the reviews for those episodes that it is really, really, really difficult to find that kind of balance. Well, guess what? In this episode, the writers found that balance. This is how you do it. This is perfect. I remember the very first time that I watched this episode, there was no way. I was floored when Ben Nelson appeared at the door at the end as Oleg Kemmer. You could not have called that, I don't think, unless you really, really go hard with the type of trope of, oh, you know what, I narrowed it down to the guy that I recognize. That happens sometimes. Sometimes in a movie there will be, a well-known actor or actress who takes on what appears to be a really, really small role, and then at the end it turns out that they're kind of the mastermind behind the whole thing or whatever, right? Because you wouldn't have, that character in such a small role. There was a movie a little while ago that I watched with my family. I honestly don't remember the name of it. It was with Dwayne Johnson and Kevin Hart. And Aaron Paul from Breaking Bad happened to be in the movie. And he only had a small part in the beginning. But then it turned out that he was a big part of the end. And that's an example of that, right? A prominent person seemingly not doing a whole heck of a lot, but in the end they come out. But that was not really a very, very common thing from shows back in the 70s. And here it is perfectly done. This is how you have that kind of character reveal. And I think that writers and producers should take note on how to do it really, really well, because it's done fantastically here. So, begs the question, why would I not give this episode an S? Well, here's what I found. I would say that there is a little bit of imbalance in terms of the teamwork. I mentioned that this is an episode that is very, very, very tilted in terms of the action and the plot, in terms of Elizabeth Ashley as Andrea. And I'm not complaining the least bit about that. As I mentioned, she is worth every second of screen time. But this is not quite a Power of 4 episode. So that's a small knock against it. Another couple of things that I found. Again, it almost always has to do with landing the ending. I think this ending is really quite good, but a couple of things I noticed. Andrea is able to send a message in Morse code by using the phone in the room where Varsi is holding her in the apartment. Why would Varsi leave the phone in the room and connect it? Obviously, it's necessary to the plot, but for a guy who is so intelligent and careful, just seems like something that he would not overlook. I don't know. That bothered me just a teeny little bit. Enough that I would say, yeah, you guys missed that a little bit. Also, I would say that the ending has what I think is a pretty major coincidence. Varsi and Andrea kind of work together. He kind of shuffles quietly along the floor over to a small end table where there's a lamp. And he and Andrea are able to work together to knock over the lamp, to distract Kemmer. And just at that moment, Jim jumps into the window. And the fight ensues. I get it. I understand that, that's kind of necessary for the plot, and I'm not saying that it was bad, but again, is there a little bit of contrivance there? Yeah, there is, and it's just a little bit noticeable. It's more than a little bit noticeable to me. So just for those reasons, I'm going to say that this one gets an A+ rather than an S. Boy, they really came close. And I can't knock it a lot because I can't say, how would I have done it better? I don't know. They did it really tremendously well. So I'm not going to knock any of it. But I'm going to settle on a grade of a really solid A+. There's going to be a decision I'm going to have to make at some point when I rank all of these episodes. Kidnap or this episode? Which one was better? And I have to give that one a lot of thought. There's a few others that I've given A+ to that are going to be in that mix, and that is going to be a very interesting question. I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode review video as much as I enjoyed making it. This one was a lot of fun. Please like this video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And please leave your comments about this and other episodes. Thank you again. We've got 6 episodes left to go before we finish the reviews for the original series. And I'm looking forward. Every time we get towards the end of a season, I really kind of do look forward to it because I just feel like it's kind of time to move on. And I am looking forward to going to the revival series as well. But we'll deal with that when the time comes. Thank you guys all again for watching, and I will see you next time.